Hello everyone, Vanessa here to do kind of a mid-month wrap-up of what I've been reading so far in the month of November, which has basically only been for Nonfiction November. The first book I read was Dare to Disappoint, and I believe this is by Ozgë Samanci. I think that's how you say her first name, but I'm not 100% sure. When I did my Nonfiction November TBR, I said it was about a boy because of the picture on the cover, but I didn't realize that there's someone with pigtails and that it's actually a little girl. So this is about Samanci, who grew up in Turkey. It delves into her going to school and all the things that are going on in the background that also informs her coming of age story. I think this book, first of all, it is beautiful, and just with that I would say that's enough for me to tell you you should read it. I really enjoyed the way she crafted it together. It uses a lot of mixed media, so it's not just drawings, there's other things in there as well. I really enjoyed all the white space that is in the book. It just looks very sleek and modern. I really enjoyed the yellows, which is kind of like her blonde hair, and the blues from the seas. That's the main theme throughout. You'll see those two colors continue to pop up. I think the only place that this book really lacked was it kind of lacked direction after we were faced with the main conflict of the story, facing problems with her family, with her dad, upon deciding what she wants to be and it not being necessarily what her dad wants her to be. But it just continued to be like a cycle, and I understand that's kind of how life works. It's you try to do something and your parents don't really like it, so you try to do something else and then they don't like it, and it continues that way. But it just felt like the story lacked direction there because I was a little bit like, okay, we know that this is a problem, how are we going to get past it? And I don't think towards the end we really got an answer. Maybe we'll get a part 2, kind of like how Persepolis is a part 2, to learn more about like how she got out of Turkey, because she's now a professor at Northwestern here in the US. So I kind of just want to know that. And I also will really say that I enjoyed all of the history that she put in there. Like, she drew out leaders and political consequences and governments that were involved in changing the way that Turkey looked. Made it more Western, made it more modern, then kind of like a backlash to that and going back towards more fundamentalism. And so it's this pull back and forth that always is going to inform how a child grows up. I think it's very important that she included that historical aspect of it. I also read Embroideries by Marjane Satrapi. If you don't know Marjane Satrapi, she wrote Persepolis, which won a bunch of awards and is touted as one of the greatest graphic memoirs out there, so definitely if you haven't read Persepolis, you should. Embroideries is a much shorter and less serious take on people that she grew up around. She focuses on women, her mom, her grandma, her aunts, and neighbors around them. Just looks into what they think about men, sex, and love. We don't hear as much about taboo topics, sex, come up in conversations between women, so I found this lighthearted as well as enlightening. I say lighthearted because there's a lot of silly parts, there's a lot of funny stories in it, there's a lot of self-deprecating humor, some very like explicit conversations about sex that I don't see very often in books that I read. And I also said that this book was very enlightening. It gives us a new conversation and a new topic we don't hear as much about. I mean, I don't think I necessarily talk this way with people around me, but I can tell that it's cathartic to them and that it's very important to them, and I'm glad that I am able to hear about that experience. And the last book that I will talk about is March Book 2. This is by Congressman John Lewis, as well as a writer, Andrew Aydin, and artist Nate Powell. This is about Congressman John Lewis's work in the 1960s civil rights movement. This one specifically focuses on the freedom rides. It culminates with the March on Washington. This was exactly what I needed to read after the election, and it put so many things in perspective for me. This is such important history, and I really wish that more people read this series, because I've read a lot about the civil rights movement, but there's really nothing that comes close to having a personal recollection of it like Congressman John Lewis gives. He is the only person that's still alive from the group of speakers alongside Martin Luther King Jr. I also just really enjoyed that he doesn't tell a sanitized version of this history, and he tells you deep down all the problems, not just that they faced that were very violent, but also all the inner struggles in the civil rights movement and all the people who didn't really agree with Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolence techniques. Like this book mentioned a lot Stokely Carmichael, who had very different ideas about what the civil rights movement should be like. You can see the differences because Congressman John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael were involved with the Students' Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, which ended up becoming less nonviolent later on into the 70s. This book had a lot of real serious moments that took me by surprise because, like I said, I've studied this movement. One of the things I really studied when I was an undergrad and that I really enjoyed learning about. But I learned new things in here that I didn't really learn in school. I never knew that they also protested not being allowed into movie theaters, and they would just go in a line to the front of the ticket booth and ask to be seated, ask to get a ticket, and be told no, and then they would just go to the end of the line and just keep going through that circle and face lots of violence for doing that. At the end of the day, Congressman John Lewis is my hero, like one of the people that I really look up to, and one of the people that I'm really grateful I could hear his story. If you haven't picked up this series, I definitely recommend that you start. March Book 3 just won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature. If that in any way inspires you to pick it up, I really recommend that you get this series and learn more about Congressman John Lewis. And that is my whole discussion of all the books that I've been reading recently for Nonfiction November. I think it's going very well, and I will come back to you when I read some more nonfiction since the month is not yet over. Thanks so much for watching my video. I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye.